Okay, Rabbi, we're at the Mishnah on DAF Ayin Dalet Amid Aleph. We're talking about get al tanai, and retroactivity plays a big role in our discussion today. Raizel gitech al menashe titni li masayim zuz, harezu migureshes v'titein. If a man says to a woman, "You are hereby divorced on the condition that you give me 200 zuz," so she's divorced, but provided that she gives the money. This is extortion, of course, right? We don't encourage this. We're not suggesting that this is an ethical thing to do. The Mishnah is neutral on the ethics of the issue. The Mishnah is talking about the mechanics. Okay. Al menashe titni li mikan ve'ad shloshim yom, im nasna lo besoch shloshim yom migureshes v'im lavena migureshes. Now, what if he places an extra condition? He says, I want the 200 zuz within 30 days. So if she meets that, if she complies and gives it within 30 days, she's divorced, and if not, not. So Amar Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, Maisa b'tzidon be'echad sharmer li'ishto harei zegitech al menashe titne li'itztalisi. There was once a story, says Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, about a man who said to his wife, I'll divorce you on the condition that you return my itztalis, which is some kind of valuable cloak. Now, whether or not he knew that, in other words, this is a messy divorce, and she's got the house with all of his clothes in it, and he says, I'll only give you the get. I want my coat, my expensive cashmere coat. I want that coat back. So let's say he knows, he may or may not know that she doesn't have the coat, but the point is he's either doing this out of spite or he's doing this because he really has an emotional attachment to his cashmere coat. So va'avda itztaliso va'amru chachamim titan lo estameh. The problem was that she didn't have the coat anymore. So the chachamim said she can still get divorced provided that she provides the cash equivalent. Now, the question the Gemara is going to ask is, normally when you bring a story, you're bringing a story to bolster an assertion, a halachic assertion that is made previously. There was never a halachic assertion that was made that providing cash equivalent is the same thing as providing the object of the Tanai. So it's sort of disjointed. Why are you bringing a story which is not bolstering a prior halachic assertion? The Gemara is going to discuss that. The Gemara now says, "My vitite." Now, what does it mean? Let's go back to the first case, the standard case. You're divorced if you give me 200 zuz, provided that she gives him 200 zuz. So what does that mean? Rav Huna Amar Vihi Titein, Rav Yehuda Amar Licheshe Titein. Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda have a machlokes. Rav Huna says provided that she gives, and Rav Yehuda says when she gives. We don't know what the difference between those two statements are. My beinayu ika beinayu sheniskara hageto sha'avad. The nafkamina is going to be is, let's say she comes up with the $200 or the 200 zuz, and by that time the get is no longer in existence. So Rav Huna Amar Vihi Titein Eina Tzricha Get Heimenu Get Sheni. Rav Yehuda Amar Licheshe Titein Tzricha Heimenu Get Sheni. This is the machlokus. It's a question of retroactivity. According to Rav Huna, the get works retroactively. So therefore, even if the get is no longer in existence when she comes up with the 200, retroactively she was divorced. Once she gives the money, retroactively she divorced as soon as the get came into her hands last week. Rav Yehuda says no. She's only divorced mikan ulahaba when she gives the money. And therefore, if the get is not in hand, the get is destroyed, it's torn, it's lost, so then she's not divorced until the husband writes her a second get. Utna nami gabe kiddushin. We have the same machlokus when it comes to the laws of marriage. Ki agabe ditnan ha'omer leisha harei mikudeshes li almanashe etein loch masayim zuz harei hi mikudeshes v'yitein. The Mishnah in Kiddushin says that if a man says to a woman, you are hereby married to me, but provided that I come up with 200 zuz, and she accepts that as the condition. So the law is that she's married, but he has to give her the money. Now, the itmar mai v'yitain. So the same question: what does it mean he has to give? Rav Huna Amar v'hu yitain, Rav Yehuda Amar licheshe titain. Same language of Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda arguing, and the question is mai beinayu. What's the difference? Ika beinayu shepashta yada v'kibla kiddushin me'acher. What would happen is if in the interim from the time she got the ring to the time that the guy came up with the 200 zuz, she accepted kiddushin from another guy, obviously a slightly fickle lady. Rav Huna Amar v'hu yitain tana ba'almahu mekayim tana va'azil. Tana ba'almahu mekayim tana va'azil. And Rav Yehuda Amar Licha Sheyitain L'chiyoiv Lahuda Habu Kiddushin Hashta Lo Habu Kiddushin Hashta Lo Habu Kiddushin. So the machlokus is it working retroactively or not? According to Rav Huna, it works retroactively. So even if he gives her the 200 zuz after she got kiddushin from a second guy, retroactively she's mikudeshes to the guy who gave her the 200 zuz, and therefore the second kiddushin she received is meaningless. She's married to guy number one. According to Rav Yehuda, the kiddushin that the first guy gave her is only activated when he gives her the money. So therefore, if she took kiddushin from a second guy, she's married to the second guy, and the first guy's giving of the money is now meaningless. So now the question is, if we already see this machlokus between Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda regarding whether it works, the Tanai works retroactively or not, why do you need to write it both by kiddushin and by gittin? And the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Now here we're going to see the unpacking of a double tzrichasa, which means the Gemara is going to be extremely thorough in explaining why, both according to Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda, it has to be written in both places. Di'i ashmi'inin gabe kiddushin b'haka amar Rav Huna v'hu yitain mishum de l'krova ka'aseh. Aval gabi gerushin de l'rechoka ka'asi emamodi le'la Rav Yehuda. So I'll tell you why, says the Gemara. Maybe, remember, Rav Huna holds of retroactivity. Maybe the only reason by Kiddushin that he holds of retroactivity is because the presentation of Kiddushin is an act of connecting to her. He's obviously smitten with her, and he wants to marry her as quickly as possible. And maybe only there does Rav Huna hold, therefore, of retroactivity, that as soon as he gives her the ring, even before he comes up with the cash, he wants to be married to her. But when it comes to Gittin, distancing her from him may be something that he does with reticence and reluctance. And therefore, maybe Rav Huna would agree, but if we didn't have the Mishnah by Gerushin, that it doesn't work retroactively, it only works when she comes up with the cash. And therefore, you needed to write it in both places. V'yashmin and gabi gerushin, b'haka amar Rav Huna v'hititin mishum delo kasif l'mitva. Aval gabi kiddushin d'ksifa l'mitva imamodi leila Rav Yehuda. But now let's offer a counter svara. Maybe the only reason why retroactivity works is maybe it only works for gerushin, for divorce. Why? Because when the husband is stipulating that you, my wife, have to give me 200 zuz in order for you to be divorced, men are typically more aggressive than women, or more brazen than women, and therefore maybe the reason it works retroactively is because the man has a tendency to be aggressive to collect debts, and he wants it therefore to work right away, and therefore there's a greater argument for retroactivity when he's the one who's demanding that she give him money. But in a situation where it's the reverse, by Kiddushin, where the woman is the one who's owed the money by the husband in order for the Kiddushin to take effect, since she is not as aggressive as the husband to collect that debt, perhaps the Kiddushin would only work once she gets the money, because she's not going to aggressively go after him. It's not going to happen as quickly. And therefore there's a greater argument to say that it doesn't work retroactively by Kiddushin. So again, it depends from whose perspective. From the man's perspective, Kiddushin, there's more of a svara for it to work retroactively. For the woman's perspective, who's got to collect the debt, there's more of a reason for it not to work retroactively, and that's why Rav Huna has to say that it works retroactively in both Gittin and Kiddushin. Now let's look at Rav Yehuda. V'i ashmi'in gabi Kiddushin b'haka amar Rav Yehuda l'cheshiyitin mishum d'ksifa l'mitva. Aval gabe gerushin delo kasif l'mitva emamoda leila Rav Huna. So Rav Yehuda, who says there's no retroactivity, maybe the only time he holds there's no retroactivity is by the Kiddushin, where she's the collector of the debt. Since she's not as aggressive, therefore there's more of a reason to say it's going to take longer, and therefore it doesn't work retroactively. But by a get, where the man is collecting the debt from the woman, so since he's more aggressive and he wants to move more quickly, so therefore maybe there's more of a reason to say retroactivity, even according to Rav Yehuda. The Iashmein gabe gerishin b'haka amar Rav Yehuda l'cheshetitin mishum del rechoka kaase aval gabe kiddushin del krova kaase imamod leila Rav Huna tzricha. And let's go now to the opposite svara. By gerishin, there's more of a reason to say that it doesn't work retroactively, says Rav Yehuda, because he's distancing her from him, and therefore there's a greater reticence to do that, and therefore maybe that's the only place where Rav Yehuda says that it doesn't work retroactively. But maybe for Kiddushin, where the guy is smitten by her, there's more of a reason. In there, Rav Yehuda would agree to Rav Huna that there's retroactivity, and therefore Rav Yehuda needs to stake his claim both by Gittin and by Kiddushin that there is no retroactivity. So just once again, the machlokus between Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda, does a Tanai create a retroactive reality, or only Mikan Ulahaba reality once the Tanai is fulfilled? Meisvei, let's now challenge this. Hareze gitech al menashe titni li masayim zuz, afal pisha nikra haget o shenevad megureshes. So this brisa says, seems to be a direct challenge to Rav Yehuda, because this brisa seems to say explicitly that there is retroactivity. If a man presents a woman with kiddushin and he says, this is your kiddushin on the condition that I come up with 200 zuz, then, I'm sorry, I beg your pardon, this is a brisa about divorce. He says, this is your divorce on the condition that you give me 200 zuz. So the Brisa says, even if when she comes up with the 200 zuz, the get is torn up or destroyed, she's still divorced. The only thing is that she cannot marry anyone else until she comes up with the money. So you see very clearly that Rav Huna is defended by this brisa. There seems to be retroactivity, and the get doesn't have to be in existence when she comes up with the 200 zuz. Va'otan, and let me show you another brisa. Hareze gitech al menashe titni li masayim zuz umeis, nasna ina zakuka liyavam, lo nasna zakuka liyavam. That if a man gives a woman a divorce paper and he says, this is your get on the condition that you give me 200 zuz, shortly thereafter he passes away. If she was able to present him with the cash before he passed away, so then she's divorced before death, and therefore she doesn't fall for yibum to her deceased husband's brother. But if she was not able to come up with the money before he died, so then, there cannot be a fulfillment of the Tanai, and therefore she falls for yibum. But Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel omer nosenes la'aviv o la'achiv o la'echad min ha'krovim. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, guess what? She can fulfill the Tanai of the get even after the husband is dead. You know how? She can give the money to one of his heirs, either to his father, his brother, or to any one of his other relatives who inherits him. And by doing that, she fulfills the Tanai, and retroactively, even post-mortem, she's divorced from the time that the husband gave her the get, and she wouldn't fall to Yibum. So the Gemara now makes an interesting observation. Ad kan lo pligi ela demar savar li velo liyorshai, umar savar li vafilu liyorshai. V'kuli alma miha tana havi. Now, the only machlokus between the Chachamim and Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is this. When a woman gives the 200 zuz to one of the guy's heirs, is she fulfilling the Tanai or not? The Chachamim say she's not fulfilling the Tanai because the husband only wanted himself to acquire the money, not his heirs. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, implicit in the Tanai is that if I'm not around and you give it to one of my heirs, that's a fulfillment of the Tanai. But they both apparently agree that there's retroactivity here. There's only a problem, according to the Chachamim, is that even retroactively, you can't fulfill the Tanai. Why? Because if the husband's not alive, you can't give him the money. But if you hold like Rav Shimon, but the Chachamim say, in theory, retroactivity works. So this is a tiyufta to Rav Yehuda. This is a challenge of Rav Yehuda. It seems to be a refutation. So Amar Lacha Rav Yehuda Hamani Rebbehi, the Amar Rav Huna Amar Rebbe, Kol HaAmar Al Manas Komer Me Achshav Dami, O Pligi Rabbanan Alei, Va'ana Da Amri Rabbanan. So the Gemara answers, no, Rav Yehuda tells you like this. Rav Yehuda says, you don't understand it. So Machlokas Tanoim. I hold like the Chachamim. But these brises that you just quoted to me go according to Rebbe. Rebbe says that anytime you say the word me'achsha, that anytime you say the words almanas on the condition, then it's almost as if you've stated explicitly, I want it to work retroactively. But the Chachamim disagree with that. The Chachamim say that you have to explicate me'achshav in order for retroactivity to set in. I hold like the Chachamim, and therefore, since you didn't say explicitly me'achshav, then there's no retroactivity. Now, va'amar Reb Zera ki havinan bebavel amrinan hada amar Rav Huna amar Rebbe kol amar manas komer me'achshav dami pligi rabbanon alei. Now, Reb Zera says that when I was in Bavel, I learned exactly like Rav Yehuda, that there's a machlokus between the Chachamim and Rebbe regarding when you say almanas, on the condition. Does that imply retroactivity or not? And it's a machlokus between the Chachamim who say there's no retroactivity and Rebbe who says that implies retroactivity. But Kisliki, Ashkachti l'Rebbe Asi diyasu v'karma mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan hakol modim ba'omer almanas ka'omer me'achshav dami. But when I went to Eretz Yisrael, I ran into Rabbi Asi, and he told me the name of Rabbi Yochanan that no. Everyone, both Rebbe and the Chachamim, agree that when you say almanas, on the condition, that implies retroactivity automatically, both according to the Chachamim and according to Rebbe, not like Reb Zera had learned in Bavel, and not like Rav Yehuda. But lo nechlaku ela b'mei hayom ula achar misa. The only machlokus is if you use a different language when you make the Tanai. You don't say almanas, you say you are hereby divorced from today until the day I die. So the question is, does the husband mean to say that it works retroactively, or does it work at the time that I die? And this is the machlokus, that it's get v'hatanya. This is the bryce that says mehayom ula achar misa get ve'eno get. That's considered to be, and we learned this on DAF Ayin based a couple days ago, that according to the Chachamim, it's doubtful whether that's a retroactive get or not, divrei Chachamim, and Rabbi Omer, kazeh get, Rabbi says no, it works retroactively before, from the time that he gives the get, and it's a perfectly valid get. The Chachamim are in doubt. Did the husband mean that I wanted to be activated when I die, in which case it can't be a get, because there's no get post-mortem, or did he mean to say that I wanted to be activated now? That's the only machlokas. So now the Gemara says, Ula Rav Yehuda da'amar ba'almanas pligei ademiflagi b'mehayom la'achar misa liflagi ba'almanas. So the question is like this. Rav Yehuda clearly disagrees with the rabbis of Eretz Yisrael. And he says that the machlokas of whether there's retroactivity or not applies even in a case of almanas, which is more indicative of retroactivity. But he says even in that case, the Chachamim say there's no retroactivity. So now my question is, why then does the Brisa only present the machlokus in a case of b'mei hayom ula achar misa, where there's a greater ambiguity and reason to say there's no retroactivity? Let them tell me even of the bigger chiddush, that according to the Chachamim, not only is there no retroactivity by the words b'mei hayom ula achar misa, but there's even no retroactivity when you use the words almanas. The Gemara says, lo diacha kochu de Rebbe. The answer is because this Bryce is telling you how far Rebbe takes the concept of retroactivity. Not only does Rebbe hold that there's retroactivity when you say almanas, he even holds this retroactivity when you use the term mehayom la'achar misa. So the Gemara says v'liflagu ba'almanas u'ladiyacha kochan derabanan. Well, why did the Brisa choose to emphasize how far Rebbe applies retroactivity? Why didn't the Brisa choose to emphasize how far the Chachamim take non-retroactivity? The Gemara answers koach dehetera adiflei. This is a very common term that is used in the Gemara a number of places. People seem to have forgotten this in the modern world, but koach dehetera adif means that you always give prominence to the Tana who's willing to provide a more liberal shita, which is that Rebbe here is saying that there are more instances of where this get will be a get. And that's why we want to highlight how far he goes to say that the get is retroactive, to be matur the isha, right? It's true the Chachamim are more machmir, but when we have the opportunity to either give prominence to the liberal shita or the more machmir shita, we give more prominence to the liberal shita.
It's more a chiddush.
Koach de'atera adif is because it's a greater chiddush, and we want to be able to give more prominence to it because it's more of a chiddush, right? Al menashe titne li mikan v'ad shloshim yom v'chulei. Then we had Rabbi Shimon and Gamliel Then we had the second case of the Mishnah, which was you are hereby divorced. He provides a double condition: 200 zuz. And within 30 days. So if she provides it within 30 days, she's divorced. If not, even if she comes on day 31, sorry, it's too late. So the Gemara says, pshita. Like, isn't that obvious? What's the chiddush? She's not fulfilling the Tanai. The Gemara says, mahu detema kapte lav kapeda, ulazar ze ka'asei kamash malan. You might have thought that the husband is not such a stickler on 30 days. The reason he said, I want the money within 30 days, is because he wanted to make sure that she had a deadline, because otherwise she would always say mañana. So therefore, that's why he said 30 days. Not because he dafko demands 30 days, but because she'll have alacrity and she'll be quick to act. So the chiddush is no. You don't say the husband was lav dafka. The husband was dafka. He meant 30 days. He said 30 days. That's what he meant. And therefore, if she comes up with it, yes. If doesn't, if day 31, it's already too late. Amar Rav Shimon Gamliel Ma'isa B'tzidun Chulei. Then Rav Shimon Gamliel provides a story that doesn't seem to be related to any previous halachic assertion. So, Mai Tana de Ketani Maisa. The Gemara says Rav Shimon Gamliel is talking about providing cash equivalents for the stipulation in the Tanai. Where was such a halachic assertion previously made that you can bring a story to support it? So the Gemara says, you're right. Chisuri machzer v'hachi ketani. There's a shtickle missing from the Mishnah, which has to be read as follows: Im omerla almanashe titneli itztalisi v'avda itztaliso itztalisi dafka ka'omar la. That if a man says, you're divorced provided that you can bring me back my cashmere coat, so then if she brings the cashmere coat, she's divorced. If she can't, because the coat is lost, then sorry, she can't be divorced through this get. But Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer Titin lo es dameha. Shimon Gamliel says no. If you can assess the value of the coat, let's say it's $1,000 coat, and she gives him $1,000, so then she's divorced. And va'amar Shimon Gamliel Ma'isa nami b'tzidan be'echad shamar le'ishto harei zegitich hamanashe titnin li itztalisi va'avda atztaliso va'amru chachamim titen lo es dameha. And there actually was a story in Sidon, says Shimon Gamliel, where the chachamim allowed her to remarry based on her providing of the cash equivalent. So now bo'amine Rabbi Asi mi Rabbi Yochanan harei zegitich hamanashe titnin li mosayim zuz v'chaz of amar la mechulim lachmahu. Interesting related question. What if a man says, you're divorced only if you give me 200 zuz, and then the next day he says, you know what, I'm moichel the 200 zuz, you're divorced. It's, in other words, not only am I moichel it, it says, I hereby declare it's as if I've already received the 200 zuz. Right? So is that a fulfillment of the Tanai or not? So tiboy l'Rabbanan, tiboy l'Shimon Gamliel. Now, the truth is, we're dealing with something that's a cash equivalent, right? In other words, he's providing the equivalency, in a sense, of the payment, right? He's basically saying it's as if I received it. But this is not only a question according to Rav Shimon Gamliel, it's a question according to the Chachamim as well. Why? Let's explain. Tiboy l'Rabbanan, because ad kan lo kami Rabbanan hasam ela delo achla gaba, aval hacha ka'amar la mechulim lach. So maybe the Chachamim are only machmir when the man says, I want my cashmere coat. And if not, you're not divorced. So there, he's not showing any type of conciliation, any type of, he's a stickler and he's angry at her. So therefore, there's more of a reason to say that if she doesn't come up with the coat, she's not divorced. But over here, the husband is showing he's a softie, right? So therefore, maybe maybe the Chachamim would agree that in this case, it's a mechila and she's divorced. O Dilma, afila Reb Shimon Gamliel lo ka'amar ela dekama faisa le b'dimei, aval legamrei lo. Or maybe you could argue in the opposite direction. Maybe Rav Shimon Gamliel, who says that coming up with the $1,000 instead of the cashmere coat, only there he says she's divorced. But over here, she's not giving him anything. And so therefore, maybe Rav Shimon Gamliel would say, even here she's not divorced because she hasn't fulfilled any part of the Tanai. She hasn't done anything to fulfill the Tanai because the husband is just totally moichel. So maybe Rav Shimon Gamliel only holds that she's fulfilling the Tanai when she actually gives him at least the cash equivalent. But when she's giving him nothing, maybe he would agree that it's not a fulfillment of the Tanai.
He's not nullifying the Tanai when he's moichel her. He's not nullifying the Tanai.
First of all, you can't nullify a Tanai. All you can say is, I hereby make it as if you gave it to me. He's moichel it, but you can't nullify a Tanai once if it was already attached to the get. So that's the Gemara's safek. The Gemara's question here is maybe Rav Shimon Gamliel would agree that this is not a valid get because she didn't do anything. She hasn't fulfilled anything. So Amar Le,
she can change mind after day. Yeah.
That's exactly what Gershom was saying. Is that no, that you can't. Once you've attached the Tanai to a get, you can't just wave a wand and say the Tanai is off. What you can say is that you fulfilled the Tanai as far as I'm concerned. Okay?
So you have to write a new get?
No, you don't have to write a new get. You're saying, I have the ability to say that I now feel enriched as if you've given me 200 zuz.
It's okay.
That a person... No, that's our question. Our question is, that's our question. That is exactly what we're asking now. We are asking now, is that like receiving the cash equivalent or not? That's our question. So, Amar le eina megureshes. So Rabbi Yochanan said, no, sorry, it doesn't work. And he's saying it across the board, he paskins, it doesn't work. If she does nothing, so then she's not divorced. So, Esve. So now we're going to challenge you. Ha'omer lechaveiro koinem shatanena li im iatanosin livni kor echad shel chitin ushtei chavuyo shel yain. Let's say a man, Reuven, goes over to Shimon and he says, Shimon, you know, I know you're my friend and I do a lot of favors for you, but I'm never going to do any more favors for you. You're never going to get any hana'ah from me. I take a neder. All my stuff is usher to you. You see my son. My son is struggling financially. You give him a bushel of wheat and 2 barrels of wine, and then you can start. I'll continue starting doing favors for you again. But until that happens, I don't want to talk to you. So that's the Tanai he makes. So Reb Meir Omer Aser Ad Sheyitain v'Chachamim Omrim Af Ze Yochol Lahatir Es Nidur Shal Pi Chacham v'Omer Hareini Ki'ilu Hiskabalti. So Reb Meir says that Shimon has to come up with the wheat and the wine in order for the neder to be removed. And the Chachamim say no. The Chachamim say that it's possible for Reuven to go over to Shimon and say, you know what? I only made the neder because my son was struggling financially. He just made a killing on a deal. And you know what? He doesn't need the money anymore. He doesn't need the provisions anymore. And I make it now as if I've already received it. So now you see, according to the Chachamim, to be moichel on the requirement of the neder, on the Tanai of the neder, apparently works to have the neder removed. So why don't you say the same thing by the get? That the get is a good get just by the guy being moichel on the Tanai. So the Gemara says, Hachi hashta hasam l'tziura kama chavin v'lo tziara, hacha mishum arvachahu v'halo itzterich. So the Gemara says there's a conceptual difference. When a man made a Tanai with his wife, this is your get on the condition that you give me 200 zuz. He didn't just attach a financial Tanai to the get. He attached an emotional Tanai to the get. What I mean by this is that what was the husband's whole objective? He wanted to make her suffer financially, to struggle to come up with 200 zuz in order to be able to be divorced. And in that situation, the next day he has remorse, he has rachmanis, whatever, and he's moichel. But he can't nullify the original Tanai, which was with the objective of inflicting upon her emotional distress, right? That part of the Tanai, he can't be moichel on. He can say, perhaps it's as if I received the money. But the emotional aspect of the Tanai, he can't undo. So therefore, that's the reason why Rabbi Yochanan says she's not divorced. When Reuven came over to Shimon and said, you know, my Tanai is you got to help my son out, there it wasn't to inflict pain upon Shimon. It was because Reuven's son really needed financial help. So that's the reason why Reuven made the Tanai. Now that Reuven's son doesn't need any financial help anymore, so then the Mechila actually works over there because there's no other emotional component to that Tanai. So Hahu Gavra Da'amar Leila Arise Kuli Alma Dolu Tlas Dalvasa Ve'achli Riva At Deli Arba Ve'echol Tilsa Lesof Asa Mitra. Let's look at an interesting story. A landowner hires a sharecropper and he says, you know, my friend, normally the sharecroppers are employed to irrigate the field 3 times in the season, and then they take 25% of the yield of the field for their labor. But I would like my field to be watered a 4th time, and I will pay you extra. I'll give you 1/3 of the field instead of the normal 1/4 for your in consideration for your extra labor. So what happened was, the guy watered the field 3 times, irrigated the field 3 times, and right before he was about to irrigate it a 4th time, it rained, and so irrigation was no longer necessary. Now, of course, not only is it not necessary, but you can't irrigate it now because you might wipe out the crops. So therefore, the sharecropper comes and says, listen, your field was irrigated 4 times, 3 by me, once by God, and I would therefore like my 1/3 of the as my compensation. So Amar Rav Yosef Halo Dala. Rav Yosef says, sorry, the deal was to irrigate 4 times, and he didn't irrigate 4 times. But Rabbi Amar Halo Itztricha. Rabbi says no. it didn't need the fourth time irrigation. The fact is, the balabas got irrigated 4 times. He should fulfill his deal and pay him the third. So lema Rav Yosef da'amar kerabanan v'Rabba da'amar Rav Shimon Gamliel. So the Gemara is suggesting now is, look, we have the same machlokus by our Mishnah, by the get, right? What is it? The Chachamim say that the equivalent of the cloak is not the cloak, and therefore she's not divorced if she provides him cash. But Rav Shimon Gamliel says the equivalent of the coat is the coat. And so therefore the question is like this. The Aris's claim is the equivalent of my irrigation is like the irrigation, so pay me the third. That goes like Rav Shimon Gamliel. But the Balabas is saying no, which is what Rav Yosef says. The equivalent of the irrigation is not the irrigation. You didn't do the work, and therefore I don't have to pay you. So maybe this is the same machlokes. So the Gemara says, no, v'tispera. No, this really makes sense. The Gemara says, then you're going to be ending up with an inconsistency. We paskin anytime that there's a machlokes, with rare exception, anytime there's a machlokus between Rabba and Rav Yosef, we always paskin like Rabba. Now here Rabba says that the equivalency works. But we've also seen that we always, and we'll see this tomorrow as well, we always paskin like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, except one of the few cases where we don't paskin like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is by the case of Thu Jun, the story of the cashmere coat. We don't paskin. So how can you tell me that we paskin like Rabba to say that the equivalent is the same thing, and yet we don't paskin like Rav Shimon Gamliel with the cashmere coat? So the Gemara says, Elala olam kirabanan, Rav Yosef kirabanan, v'Rabba amarlach. So really the Gemara says no. Here even the Chachamim would live with Rabba's psak that the balabas has to pay him a third. Why? Because so Rav Yosef will tell you very simple, because that the Rav Yosef says, I hold like the Rabbanan, who says that the Balabas is right, he doesn't have to pay because the equivalent is not like the Tanai. And Rabba will tell you, no, Ana Damri Yafilu Rabbanan, Ad Kan Lo Kami Rabbanan Hasam Ela Delitziura Kamachave, Aval Hacha Mishum Harvachahu Vahalo Itzderich. Rabbi will tell you no. In the case of the get, the reason why the Chachamim say that the equivalent to the coat is not the coat is because over there, the husband wished to inflict upon her emotional distress. He knew that the coat was going to be hard for her to come up with because maybe he already knew that the coat was missing or the coat was destroyed. And they said, when you give me back that cashmere coat that I know you threw away, gave to the Salvation Army, and was the cause of our divorce in the first place, then you'll be divorced. Then the get will be a get. So in that situation, the Chachamim say clearly his objective was to inflict emotional distress upon her. He wants to stick it to her, and therefore the equivalent of that is not fulfillment of the Tanai. But over here, there's no emotions here. The Balabas wants his field to be irrigated 4 times. Hey boss, you got your field irrigated 4 times, 3 times by me, 1 by the Almighty, so what difference does it make to you? Pay me the third. And that's why Rabbi says even the Chachamim would agree to this. Now, Tanan Hasan, Barishana hayadnitman yom 12 chodesh kadei shehecholut lo, hiskin hilal azaken shehecholei shesmaosav ulishka ve'eshover sadelas v'nichnas. So the Imasai Sheyirtza Halo Yavo V'Ital Esma'osav. The Brisa tells us Mishnah tells a very interesting thing. We know that there's a din of Bote Ore Choma, that the Torah says in Parshas Bahar that if you own a house in a walled city in Eretz Yisrael, you can sell your house. The seller has 12 months to buy it back and to evict the buyer and reverse the sale. If, however, 12 months elapse, then the buyer has no claim to get back his house. And the practice used to be that the buyer would hide at the last day of the 12-month period so that the seller could not find him to give him back the money because he wanted to keep the house. So Hillel made a takana to avoid that problem of the seller saying, I got the money, where are you? Right? They said, you know what? The seller can bring the cash to the Sanhedrin in the Lishka, in the Beis HaMikdash, give the money in escrow to the Sanhedrin, and then say that the Sanhedrin says, okay, it's as if we've accepted the money on behalf of the buyer, and now you can go and break down the door and reclaim your house. So, and then the buyer, whenever he wants, can come to the Sanhedrin at the escrow holding place in the Sanhedrin and pick up his money. Va'amar Rava mitakanosu shel Hillel nishma harei ze gitech al manashe titnei li masayim zuz v'nastan lo midaito megureshes al karcho eno megureshes. And why? Miditzrech le'lehillel l'tikunei nesina bal karche dahavyu nesina mechlal de be'alma nesina bal karche lo havyu nesina. So Rava makes a very interesting deduction from this whole halacha. You see that Hillel made a special provision that even in a situation where a person refuses to take payment, we force him to take payment and consider it as if payment has been made. So you see that Hillel only made that accommodation in the case of Batei Arichoma, these houses in walled cities. But in a situation of a get, if the husband says, you're divorced on the condition that you give me 200 zuz, then only if, normally we would say that a coerced giving is not called giving. In other words, when or actually a coerced receiving is not called receiving. And therefore, in our situation of Gittin, if the husband runs away from the wife and says, I don't want your money, I don't want your money, I don't want you to be divorced, if she catches up with him and sticks the money in his pocket against his will, it's not going to work. Because Hillel's accommodation only works for the case of Batei Arichoma. But you see, the fact that he even needed to make an accommodation indicates that in other cases, a forced receipt is not considered to be receipt. It's not considered a receiving. So the Gemara now says, Maskefla Rav Papa v'itema Rav Shimi Barashi v'dilma ki itzterich le'litikune shelo b'fanav avol b'fanav mein midaitu bein bal karcheo havenesina. That he says that's not necessarily so. You can't infer that from Hillel. Hillel only made an accommodation, perhaps in a situation where the two parties are not face to face. Maybe that's the reason why the accommodation was necessary. In other words, before Hillel made the accommodation, really a forced giving it constitutes receiving, right? But what Hillel accommodated further, he says, even if the two of them are not face to face, and I just deposited an escrow with the Sanhedrin, that's also called a receiving of the guy. Right? Maybe that's the accommodation that Hillel made. But in a situation where the husband and wife are face to face and she puts the money in his pocket forcibly, maybe that's also called a receiving, and you have no raya from Hillel one way or the other. V'ika da'amri, others learn that the statement was made just the opposite. Amar Rava, mitakanaso shel Hillel harei ze gitech al menashe titni li masayim zuz v'nasan lo bein midayto vein mal karcho havyu nesina. He says you can infer from Hillel's takana that the only takana that he made was when they're not face to face, and therefore when the husband and wife are face to face, if she compels him to receive it, that's because by stuffing it in his pocket, then that's considered to be a receipt. And the only time that Hillel's accommodation was necessary is when they're not face to face. So that's why Hillel had to step in. Even when they're not face to face and the guy's leaving it with escrow in the Sanhedrin, is considered to be receipt nonetheless. And we'll continue this discussion, Amir Hashem, tomorrow.